Here is the best way to stop the matrix. This way is not very easy and it takes a lot of steps, but with practice you'll be able to learn how to do it. As with all matrices, the first move is to move the e-pawn, the pawn in front of the king, up 2 squares. Black replies by moving the e-pawn up 2 squares. Next move is putting the queen on h5. Now we had talked before about using the knight to put an attack on the queen. And in one of the earlier videos I had talked about how some players just move the bishop out, and then you can eventually take the queen. Well, if you're playing somebody who's good at chess, they're going to know that move. So if you move your knight to f6 like this, then the queen is just going to take the pawn at e5 and put the king in check. And yes, as black, you can block that move, but white is ahead by 1 piece and has the queen out in the game, and it can be pretty tough to stop that. So we're going to move back a couple of moves and not move that knight. Sometimes chess players will think about using the pawn and attacking the queen with a pawn, like that. The problem with this is that the queen can still capture that pawn, but now black has 2 problems. Not only is black in check, but the bishop, or the rook, is also being attacked. So when black goes to block the check, then white can just take the rook for free. And if black is not careful, there's a possibility that white could take some of the pawns on this side too. But already white is ahead a pawn and a rook to nothing. So now we go back to this position. We've looked at 2 ways that you cannot use the matrix against a good player. So what you need to do is to protect this pawn here at e5. And the best way to do that is by using the knight at b8. And we're going to move the knight here to c6, which now protects the pawn and keeps the queen from taking the pawn. Now, white is going to move the bishop, and we can see that the white queen and the white bishop are both lined up on f7, and the matrix can now happen. So black has to do something to keep that from happening. And the best move here for black is to take the pawn now and move it up 1. And the reason why you can move the pawn up 1 is that the pawn here on e5 is being protected. So white needs to run away. So white will usually go here to f3. And if you watch the other matrix videos, you realize that the queen and the bishop are still pointed to f7, which if the queen moves to f7, it's a checkmate. But now is the time for black to move the knight to f6 to block that attack from the queen. And now the queen cannot get to the square on f7, and the matrix is stopped. Now to finish off this opening, I'm going to move the knight here to c3, and we're going to have black move the bishop into this little cubbyhole right here on g7. This is called a fianchetto, and I wouldn't expect you to know that name because it's kind of a hard name to remember. It's an Italian word. But it creates a nice little fortress here of these pieces on black side. And we'll go ahead and develop a pawn here. And now we'll have the king castle. And if you remember, in chess, a king can only move 1 square unless if the 2 squares in between the king and the rook are empty. And since these 2 squares are empty, the king can actually move over 2 squares, and the rook can come to the other side and protect the king. And now we have a really nice fortress here to protect the king. And this particular arrangement of chess pieces is called the King's Indian. And it can be a really, really tough fortress for white to break through. So Again, trying to stop the matrix in this way is difficult, but if you practice it and learn it, it is the most effective way to stop white from doing the matrix and giving black an opportunity to have a really strong game against white. So practice this, and I hope you can learn it.